start with the questions. The first question in the Q&A session: are graphical abstracts in art and humanities helpful for readers as well? I think so, especially I am from the natural sciences and from medical sciences, but I do quite a lot of qualitative research. This is the most that I go towards the humanities. So taking care of developing focus groups, what was said in focus groups, what are the main issues that were found out. And I think for these specific issues, it works very well to have graphical abstracts available, because you can digest the information, especially when you have a lot of different stakeholders of information, or maybe just digest what the main conclusion is a lot better with this. The next question that we have is, how can we use the graphics in our semi-art research? So I would need a bit more clarification on this, but if you mean in topics such as historical art research or history, you might not consider putting in the visuals as you would usually do with pictures of your art, but you would consider of what method you use, maybe to develop a workflow of that specific method. Then the next question is graphical abstract necessary in other courses such as business management? Necessary, not really, but it will gather a lot more discussion if you are at a conference or posting your research. It will gather a lot more discussion if you also decide to communicate about how you did this analyses, and that the analyses showed the outcomes that an improvement of management is possible on this and this and this and this specific topic. Um, you might show the specific outcomes also in a graphical abstract, and with this also in business management, score a lot more readers and points towards being recognizable. So the next question is, why do we need to have a paid subscription before publishing their abstract? So it's not that you would need to have a paid subscription, but if you look at BioRender specifically, so I've used also BioRender in my research in the past. BioRender has Creative Commons license that, however, is only available for appropriate quality download if you have the subscription. That means if you look at Inkscape, so Inkscape will not expect you to have a subscription in order to use the work because it's open code. But in many cases, the commercial possibilities that are currently available will ask you, in order to use this in your research, to have a subscription in order to also acknowledge the software work that they have done. Another point that was asked: at what point do you decide to use graphical representation? I would usually write off, first of all, the manuscript. I would refine the manuscript to the point that I would be able to submit it. And once I have done that, because then it is very clear that you have already your messages done. And once you have the messages, the most clear messages, you would then start to design your graphical abstract. I wouldn't start with a graphical abstract, so it's not a substitute for the text that you are writing, but it is a way then to convey the message. And sometimes it even happens that once you are again reading your manuscript, when you are designing the graphical abstract, you consider, okay, was I clear enough in the manuscript with the message that I want to convey? And you can try to do it again with the manuscript to improve it, and with this improve the clarity. Then the next Q&A question was a question that it distinctly said in our slides that graphics are not a substitute for text, but rather something to attract the attention of the reader. And this is something that I would like to emphasize more. So it's quite important that you understand that your manuscript without the graphical abstract will still remain valid, but a graphical abstract without a manuscript is just a poster, and a very digested poster. So make sure that you really spend your time on the manuscript, and then, as the next step, in order to communicate science, to better network, to better contact your peers, then also do the graphical abstract. Um, so another question is, I'm a metaphysics researcher. How can I approach graphical applications? Here, sometimes you would depict your data in a way to show, okay, what is exactly the outcome of my result, or you would show the process of what you were considering, what your hypothesis was, what were the possible outcomes, and what was then proven or disproven in your hypothesis. So, any type of research is actually applicable to graphical abstracts. It might be something also in a theoretical point of view that you would describe either the specific methodology through the graphical abstract, or you would highlight even in text, but in a better and more distinct way, the text of what your main outcome is. Um, then there has been another question in terms of closed or open source options to create graphical abstracts. So we've gone into that. So we've talked about a bit about the open source options, about the payable options. What we did not talk about is artificial intelligence as one of the parts of graphical abstracts. I think this is going to be in the next years, especially with the improvement, a quite more important point, and this will probably be also on the side of the open source software. It has still a few kinks. I've tried a few of the open source AI models in order to develop icons, but it still needs a bit of work prior to being available to everyone. So, I hope you can give an example on how you make a graphical abstract from an operational point of view, show how it's done. Thank you. So, I would best return actually to the beginning of the speech. So, let me just share the screen one more time. Um, Share screen. Let's see from this specific angle. So from the current slide, oh sorry, I'll just ensure that we get the appropriate slide in the very beginning. Okay, I think this is a very good example of a graphical abstract. Once we've talked about all of the components, this is a good way to look at it. So here you have the topic, and here you have the methodology. And from this, I don't even need to read the manuscript, and I already know it was done at this specific hospital. It was done to so many people. So many people were studied. They use genetics. They use then also biopsies to compare these two. And in order to get the best outcome comparison, they also used antibodies. So, in the end, these three components were compared amongst each other, and the validity of these three components was then compared how much they have an predictive value in patients with transplants. So what they did here is they started off with deciding for a color scheme. So they decided for the contrast of green versus white. So the green white contrast. Then they decided about what should be the focus. So the three groups were the focus, and they showed what the outcome was without using any additional words about it. And with this, they then did not put too much info, but at the same time conveyed the main message. So this is probably one of the better options of how to do it. So this they decided on the green option, green white. They decided on a very common font. So it was a font. Let me just check it one more time. So it was just a normal, I think, probably Times New Roman font. They decided on not to give too many different elements, and they decided on what the main message was and gave more of space to that main message. So another question that we got is, in the arts and humanities, are graphical abstracts becoming common? And I think the answer is yes, because all of the journals are fighting to get the most possible readers, and with the most possible readers, also to get the most attention. Therefore, when they are sharing the information online, they do want to have something that stands out. And graphical abstracts many times are the point that stands out. Therefore, it is also becoming common in those areas. The next question is the graphical abstract different between fields of research? I would believe so. Sometimes you would focus more on the process. So you would focus more on the methods that you would use, if specifically if it's open-ended, if it was a research question rather than a hypothesis, and you would try to give different options in those research questions. Sometimes if it's very standard quantitative research, you would rather focus on the quantitative parts. So it will differ between different fields, but it will have the same basic components starting off. Another question is, considering we have lots of data we put inside the manuscript, can you give some advice on how to choose which data or even scheme and illustration we could put in the graphical abstract? That is a very tricky but very important question. I would suggest, because usually when you write a manuscript, the first part of your results and conclusions, specifically the discussion and conclusion, would be the most important outcomes. Try to consider putting rather the most important outcomes that you firstly also address in your manuscript as part of your graphical abstract. Don't worry to put everything in. That is not the point of a graphical abstract, to put absolutely everything in. It is the point to give the main message, so the major output that you need in that graphical abstract. Then another question is, in philosophical research, how can we use graphical abstracts? It's very much applicable also in philosophical research. When you are considering especially questions that are open-ended, you might consider the dilemmas that are behind the questions and depict two of the dilemmas in your philosophical research. While I am not from the field of philosophy, I would suggest that you here consider the main dilemma to be depicted in the graphical abstract, and with that also communicate that graphical abstract. So another question is, I'm doing research in electrical. So how could I explain the graphical abstract electrically if I deal with electrical and electrical components? I think this is ideal for a graphical abstract because you would be depicting the electrical components that you were studying, maybe the materials that you were studying, compare the materials. So with quantitative research, it's so much easier also because you could, as in this specific example, just compare the groups. Then another question is, are there any medical journals which demand for graphical abstracts? I've actually seen quite a few that were making it optional, but I think that optional part is quite good if you want to get a better outreach to use the optional part already as an obligatory part when you submit it. So I've seen two or three medical journals that do require graphical abstracts because it is common with their social media strategy, because they want to not only communicate to the scientific community but also outside of the scientific community. So I do believe it becomes more and more common. Then the next question that we have, should graphical abstracts differ depending on the research field? That is what we already have answered. What fonts work well for scholarly journal articles that are machine readable or converted by artificial intelligence software? I know creative fonts are a problem. Are there a few fonts you can recommend that work well for such purposes? So I would stick to the ones that are most common. For my research field, the most common would be probably Times New Roman, Comic Sans. These will be the most common fonts that I would be using, but it depends on your field. Some fields have also linotype, so depends on the field. Another question, my question is, what is the length of the pages graphical abstracts could be? So graphical abstract should be rather most an A4 page, but usually they would be just a banner, so just shorter. If you have any specific restrictions, you would be considering those specific restrictions, but in general, they would be short and they would not span over more pages. So, can we use a mixed abstract where we have graphics and also a narrative text? My answer is yes. This is very common. This should be used, especially if you need anything in terms of getting more explanation, or as the example that we were looking at, they also had a conclusion with the narrative text. So, if you think it's not clear enough and you've tried a few times and you still can't get a clear enough option, then it is best to consider doing this option also with narrative text. Um, so, if we compare a common graphical abstract and a scientific poster, what are the differences? I would say with scientific posters, based on the size that you have available, you would either put more of the narrative text, that is one thing. The other option is that you would have the possibility to put more visuals in it. So, let's see that you have microscopic pictures. This would be more visuals in a scientific poster in comparison to a graphical abstract. Sometimes it doesn't have a lot of differences if the format allows for that in the specific journal. And are there any specific guidelines available for graphical abstract development? So, guidelines might be specific to journals that you are writing in, but it doesn't need to be. So, please consider where you are submitting it, and this to be the current guideline. But there is, as is in manuscript writing, a lot possibilities of how you can do it. Um, So maybe one last question. Can I use photos from my research to put together a graphical abstract? Depends on the journal that you are publishing in many journals, because this is also something that would help the journal itself. This would be something that is approved and that is available. So let me see any questions. Yeah, maybe just a practical one, and this is really the last one. We use BioRender sometimes, but it is difficult to pass the graph outside. How we can resolve it? So if you mean that it's difficult to export them, if you use the subscription model, you have different options to export BioRender. If you mean that you can't use your own graphs in BioRender, you can upload it, but it needs to be in a JPEG form. So you can use also that, but then it needs to be a big enough quality in order to ensure that there is a high quality of the specific picture that you are developing in BioRender. And this wraps it up for today, for this session. Thank you all for joining. It was a very lively discussion, and we welcome any further discussions and any further requests for webinars on similar topics, as here we can have um, the best possible discussion on what is available for researchers all over the world. Thank you.